Welcome everyone, and welcome Dr. George Tilesch with us. I hope you enjoyed the conference so far, and now we will have a live dialogue session on the last topic of today's conference, which is the AI geopolitics, emerging AI socioeconomic models and civilization choices. So I think, this is a very complex title. Do you want to start with introducing yourselves, and then I will put some questions to you on the topic?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Benedek. I'm Dr. George Tilesch. I'm the president of the PHI Institute for Augmented Intelligence, not Argumented Intelligences, although there are many arguments pro and con, and we will go through some of these. I am an international expert and consultant in AI, especially the responsible and ethical aspects of AI for governments and corporations worldwide, and I'm building a new organization that has responsible AI and doing AI well at its center, at its core, for improving the well-being of citizens worldwide. I'm also an author. I wrote a book called BetweenBrains, Taking Back Our AI Future, together with NASA's Chief Innovation Officer. And I have lots of messages for the audience regarding the geopolitical realities of AI.
Geopolitics, that sounds on one hand scary a little bit, and we cannot really turn our heads away from what is happening in the world today. So I would like to ask maybe the first question around that one. So are there any reflections in the AI industry about what is happening in Ukraine and with Russia today?
Sure. First of all, I wanted to express my gratitude for the women in the audience on International Women's Day, and I'm pretty sure that if more women would join the AI field in leadership roles, we would have an entirely different discussion today on what course AI should take. But focusing on the topic itself, let me start with a personal anecdote. In the book I've just referenced, we have envisioned the future of war scenarios and what we call future case studies, and one of them was actually tailored on a Russia situation, on a country like Ukraine or Baltic countries, like how easy it is for a power that has mastered AI to bring another nation to its needs in 5 to 10 minutes. Only using capabilities and technologies and without needing boots on the ground. Now, what we see in reality now is not as straightforward technologically, but I think that the AI community has already been discussing in the last few weeks on Twitter the implications, what we have seen used on the battlefield right now, different AI technologies used on the battlefield. So we have seen examples of massive disinformation and deepfake attempts. I don't know how much you have heard about the Russian deepfakes that were created for speaking on behalf of Ukrainian President Zelensky on basically laying down their weapons. So that was aimed at changing the course of war entirely, and it was done with deepfake technologies. Also, we see increasingly autonomous drones on the battlefield, especially on the Ukrainian side right now, but we know that the Russians have some of those drones, and we know from the recent future that in the broader region, these drones have already changed or won certain wars or certain isolated conflicts for Turkey, who is the biggest partner of the Ukraine in drone technology. I think that the most interesting aspect of AI being used in this war is the community aspects of it. So the Ukraine has already declared this as a hybrid war. This is definitely a cyber physical conflict. What I have been most impressed by in the last 14 days is the amount of civilian help and hacking communities coming together and basically joining the battle without any exact mandate as irregular forces. So there have been massive cyber attempts on the Ukrainian side, targeted at the Russian side, that have been extremely successful gathering information. So there is basically an information war and a high-tech war unfolding in front of our very eyes. And I believe that the wars of the future will be increasingly driven by AI and less by boots on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned deepfake, and I myself, although I know what deepfake is and how it can kind of mimic somebody's talking in different words. I mean, you can literally put into another people's mouth what you want to say, have said with him. I'm always shocked when I see it. So I think these are powerful tools, and we really have to seriously to monitor these. You now discussed a little bit about Russia and Ukraine, but you also work globally. So what do you see the major geopolitical players and the geopolitical powers in AI trends, if I want to use that word, probably. So what do you see the key elements of today's AI geopolitics?
Sure, thank you. I will try to focus on the personal and the not so obvious parts of it, because I'm pretty sure that everybody or most people in the audience know who the key players are or who are the leaders in that regard. By now, I can safely say that if we are focusing on the power aspects of AI, and I think that's going to be my crucial message for the audience, is that we should refocus from the purely technological aspects of AI into the power aspects of AI. Just jumping back to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I mean, in 2017, probably everybody heard Vladimir Putin's statement on that whoever masters AI will be ruler of the world. So I'm defining AI not just as a technology, but as the primary source of power and power shifts of the 21st century. This has unique laws of power behind it, this technology that we have to understand and we have to master. So what I'm going to focus on is trying to give you an overview on the ingredients of building an AI power and different models that are emerging in the world, focusing on the not so obvious. Let's start with China. The reason why I'm starting with China, because when China started developing its national AI strategy and ambitions, it was 2016, 2017. It was something like a wake-up call for the rest of the world, especially for the US, who increasingly defined itself in a competitive way with China. And the Chinese model, the specific characteristics of the Chinese model are very much based on the incredible amount of data they can siphon away from their citizens without any kind of resistance that would be widespread in any kind of Western society. The incredible concentration of resources at the government level, the very tight collaboration between the central party instructions, local and regional governments, and also the industry. I think that the role of the Chinese industry being very tightly interconnected with the party is a very specific characteristic that gives a momentary advantage, at the very least, to Chinese leadership to achieve the goals they set out for themselves. What are these goals? They wanted to have considerable advantages by 2020, and by 2030, they want to be the unchallenged global leaders in AI. And some of the older Hungarians remember, 5-year communist plans, and that's going in 5-year programmatic plans when they're systematically bringing up that kind of leadership. Now, that kind of model has been vastly criticized in the West, because at the very core of it is what I call an AI-powered societal operating system, what the West tends to call a surveillance state. And it's more or less true. However, the values, of societies very much differ in the East and the West, especially in China, about the ability of citizens and the willingness of citizens to accept a high level of intrusion in their lives instead of resisting it, what holds the West back. So on one hand, it is considered to be a very invasive model for citizens' lives. On the other hand, it gives the Chinese government, AI gives the Chinese government an equal power in governing society, of understanding society's needs and expressed interests, and that potentially can create a high-tech totalitarian state. Much of its elements are already visible or being piloted, especially the part that is very much criticized in the West, especially by the EU, what is called a social credit system. And I'm pretty sure that everybody heard about that part. China also has the advantage of having massive resources in human capital, so they have redefined their talent programs, centrally planned government programs on raising millions and millions of educated AI leaders and AI practitioners and AI users in a much more concentrated manner than any Western state did. So that's about China right now. I live in California and in the US, and so I know a lot more from the inside about what the US does. What is important to call out is that it started under Obama, President Obama, that we started formulating, or the US started formulating some kind of a vision. And the first vision was much about a good AI society around 2014, 2015. And once President Trump came to power, that focus on good AI society has changed considerably, and competition became king, according to what they call the American values, serving American values, which is relatively hard to define. But I wanted to say that the competition became the core. I started being involved in some of the U.S. government's projects at the end of the Trump era. And actually, Trump made the strategic mistake of, for the first 2 years of being in power, they did not focus on China, and they did not focus on competition or any kind of national strategy. So they lost about 2 years in power. Now, the Biden administration is returning to a point when it's trying to mix that, societal AI, like how to build a good AI society, refocus on ethics, but at the same time maintaining the same laser focus of competing with China. And the most interesting part that is hardly known in Europe, or I would say not that much well known in Europe, is the companies, like how the U.S. federal government and the technology companies are playing this out. There has been a tremendous shift in that regard, because under Trump, the industry, the technology industry, has been nominated as the keystone for American leadership in AI. However, by the end of the term, they realized that companies are going their own way, pursuing their own interests. I think in Europe, and especially in Hungary, there's a narrative that tech companies, big tech companies, are only the extended arms of the U.S. government. That's far from being true, actually. So they could not create that level of concentration and collaboration that China is capable of doing by state-controlled or state-influenced enterprises. So America has a distinct leadership in AI technologies when it comes to the big technology companies. I think there is a robust power accumulated in the military aspects of it via DARPA and the funding that is going into DARPA for AI projects. And there are lots of new research labs that have been positioned and set up in the last years, about 20 of them that are aimed at maintaining this advantage. Now, last, about the EU, and of course we can talk about smaller powers, but it doesn't matter that much. The EU is trying to set itself up as the key regulator and standards maker in that scene, because the European tech industry and AI industry is somewhat lagging, to be very, very optimistic. The EU is doing what it thinks that it can do the best, which is becoming the determining leader and first jumper on creating massive regulation and policy around regulating AI. And I think that what I need to call out, and what I usually give kudos to the European Commission, is that it's very much focusing on the ethical and risk aspects of AI. So that follows that rule of like building an AI good society or a good AI society, that kind of vision. However, the speed of it is not matching, the speed of regulation is not matching the exponential jumps in AI technology. So that's just for a little introduction. And of course, happy to receive your questions.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Actually, as you know, there is a question section in the Q&A. So please go ahead, put your questions there, and I will put those questions to George, which are the most popular. So also like them. Yes, let's move on. So thank you for this introduction to the big powers, the smaller but still important powers as well. We can maybe move on this journey towards the ethics of the AI. You mentioned Europe is very much focusing on privacy issues, ethical AI, and etc. And in your book, you write that there are more than 285 rules of ethics, or let's say statements what can be considered as an ethical AI. So what do you think an ethical AI is, and where do you think the different powers, nations, companies are on the journey, or the scientific communities? How far on this journey towards developing the ethical AI?
So just to be precise about that, the 285 that I referenced are actual codes of conduct, so codes of ethics. And if I'm being a little bit sarcastic, for a few years it has been the primary way of many organizations, especially international organizations, to show relevance in the emerging AI field. That's why we have so many, and that's why we have so many overlapping rules, but everybody had to produce their own. So that's how it started. In a way, it was a good thing, I think, especially from the EU's perspective, even if it took a longer period than I think would have been necessary. So like 2 years of just arguing about 5 principles, that's a bit too much for me. But I think it is the unavoidable cornerstone of developing a principled AI development course. Why is this important? Usually when I have arguments in the AI community, especially here in the US, but also with technologists worldwide, is basically how narrowly we define ethical AI. Like a technologist would probably, look at it as a list of problems, call them bugs, that we need to overcome with primarily through technological means. And there are much broader repercussions. So there are increasingly broader shells when humans enter that, like the human-computer interaction parts of it, and of course the societal implications of it, which are also very, very tricky because some of them are not immediate, but you can only feel them a couple of years after they have happened. So there are some eroding elements in certain AI-powered technologies. Just look at how social media is being set up these days, or look at how recommendation systems are narrowing our willpower in choices. So there are these lurking elements that are also pretty hard to define. And of course, I think that the biggest chunk of ethical work needs to be anticipatory, which we don't have any idea for or model for right now. So what if AI is jumping faster to the artificial general intelligence level, and then we will be in a situation that we have not anticipated? We don't have any programs for it. We don't have any models for it. So what I wanted to call out are 2 things. One is that when I'm talking about ethical AI, I'm usually using the broadest definition possible, which is about ensuring that the vision and the model of AI development is matching the needs of our civilization. And that also means reducing the risks of it to a minimum, be them technological risks purely, and far beyond, as I tried to demonstrate before. The second thing I wanted to say is that it actually has been triggered by a study that I just co-authored for the World Economic Forum in January, and I'm happy to share it with the audience if there is any interest. It's called the AI C-Suite Toolkit, and that's for leaders of private and public organizations as well. What makes it special, I think, is that for the first time in history, responsible AI and designing AI responsibly has become a cornerstone of the broader strategy that we are recommending for any corporation or government to follow, increasing the understanding of their chief executives of what are the specifics of AI, not just as a technology, but as something that fuels their business. And I thought the reason why I was very enthusiastic about writing the study was that for the first time ever, we started focusing on the positive. The problem was for the last few years that most of these studies, or the AI ethics in general, has been defined as like, what can go wrong, And it was also mostly focusing on the compliance aspects of it, but in a vacuum where compliance is not really, prevalent because regulation doesn't exist yet. Whatever the EU has provided is just a draft that will probably enter into force like next year or 2 years from now, who knows. So what I'm trying to say here is that for any kind of leader, and I hope that there are many leaders in the audience who are having or contemplating some kind of AI strategy, is that the last few years have been demonstrated that we already have a past tense and we already have learnings about AI being introduced to organizations large and small, mostly large, and the learnings of that, like how important it is to put the focus on ethical and responsible AI development from day one. And the demonstrated advantages of that, the positive advantages of that, are actually indicators that are tightly connected to revenue generation, product quality, acceptance by consumers, being endeared by the media, being endeared by regulators. So those companies we have seen, and there are countless studies demonstrating that those organizations, technology companies first and foremost, or let's say AI intense, not traditionally technology-defined companies, won the game and became better in the competition by taking this matter seriously and not get to a point of burning millions of dollars on a certain AI product development for 2 years, and then realizing that this has to go down to the garbage bin because your consumers are rebelling or the press is rebelling and so on. So what we are preaching, I think recently, can be summed up as doing AI responsibly from day one in the organization. It should not be an afterthought. It shouldn't be driven by a compliance type of a mindset, but it equals strategic competitive advantage for your organization.
Mm. I see. Thank you. You are mentioning here that billions of dollars in creating the AIs, but when you also talked about the big powers, actually, you also mentioned that there is, or maybe I heard it, that there is a certain economy of scale for AI. So we already heard from other talks that data is very important, and those who own the data, who own the big data, they are the ones who can really be effective in creating new AI models and applications. And as far as you mentioned, maybe I just conjugating it, but in China, it's mainly the government or the government close spheres that are owning these data. In the US, it's big tech companies who are owning the data, and in Europe, it's kind of trying to regulate who owns the data. How do you see this contradiction between the state-owned data, the privately owned data, and of course, at the end of the day, as every human being, I would like to own my data, or at least I would like to know what is happening to the data I'm generating, right?
Yes, absolutely. Just as a last thought to the data aspects of what I've been preaching in ethical AI, I see that there is a new generation that has grown up as conscious consumers and conscious citizens, which includes being data conscious. So for those companies, actually, it's demonstrated now that who are practicing AI and data privacy responsibly, they have a much, much, much higher net promoter score in consumers further recommending their products or their company. Now, going back to the macro level, and let me be a little bit controversial for just one sentence. The current wave of what we call AI presently, which will change a lot going forward, actually. So I think every year AI will mean something different. But the current wave of AI is rooted in big data, that's for sure. And that's why I'm applauding your comments. I see lots of movements, and especially main thought leaders in the AI field who started preaching that the era of big data for AI is shifting. And it will be much more important how clean and accurate your data set is than the vast amounts of data you can generate. So current neural networks are devouring data, and the current technology is basically fueled by the vast amounts of data available to them. To a certain extent, we are at the stage of we have cars when we had cars in the 1910s or 1920s, but they were gas guzzlers, and that needs to change. Or there are many people influential in the industry who are trying to shift the paradigm to data-driven AI instead of model-driven AI, and there are lots of new movements starting. Now, coming back to the who owns the data, who can access the data part, yes, China has an obvious advantage of, because it acts as one conglomerate. So the party, national, regional, local governments, and the industry players are one and only conglomerate. And whatever data they can gather, it is being shared. But to give you a very personal example from the other end of the scale, I've been part of certain federal government commissions here in the US when I've been talking to and actually arguing with the chief data officers of federal agencies. And the example I was bringing to them about data access, the federal government data access, is the example of Dubai. I've been working with the Dubai government last year, and what I've seen is that one of the key aspects how a governmental agency head is surviving in his or her position is its ability or effort at taking initiative on sharing the data they generated as a government agency with citizens, with startups, with other government agencies, and so on and so forth. So open data, let's say, fostering open data access between sectors is done really, really well in Dubai and incentivized really well, because if you don't do it, you're out. I don't see that level of fervor, especially in the US, where US agencies are somewhat fiefdoms. And when I told them the Dubai example, there was a lot of gnashing of teeth and okay, but we are a big country, we cannot do that, as easily as Dubai would. I would say it only needs political will. Mm-hmm. And the EU is also doing bringing a lot of effort on top of the regulatory, which is basically what you cannot do, defined as what you cannot do, on creating European open data spaces and data policies. So what they do is, again, very commendable, and it's driven by the right kind of spirit, but it's far too slow compared to the leaders. Mm.
I see. Thank you for the comments, and thank you for this wonderful discussion. We are approaching the end of the conference. There is still room for questions, but first of all, I would like to thank you for being here with us and show you this. which is
wow.
explainable you. So this should be.
Thank you. I look slimmer.
Yes, actually, I will ship this to you via post, so you will get it as a small gift from the organizers and the staff of the conference.
I'm very grateful, Ben, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. And then let's check in the question and answer section if we have any questions at the moment. Yes, we have. So I will take the most popular ones ahead. Yes, this we already had. As we move away from mobile phones or laptops, do you have a hypothesis of? Okay, no, this was still for Misha, so I have to refocus myself.
Get scared. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yes, one question from Rosa Zareglia. We know little autonomous weapons systems pose huge risk. Do you think the lack of AI safety research is concerning? Additionally, what are your thoughts on how can we enjoy the benefits of AI while avoiding the pitfalls and preventing such potentially negative consequences?
Okay, so these are two questions. Thank you, Rosa. Lethal autonomous weapons are a huge risk for sure, and they become a much bigger risk because there is absolutely zero consensus amongst big powers how to regulate them and how to abstain from them. So the current situation is that in the United Nations proper, for the last 5 or 6 years, there have been an initiative where, some countries try to convince the others of treating autonomous weapons similarly to nuclear weapons when assessing their strength and coming to a consensus. So now the way it looks is that everybody's on board except for 5 countries. China, Russia, the US, who else? Israel. I don't remember the 5th one. So basically, it's a no-go, unfortunately, from the aspect of political will. This is very much the age of competition when every AI power knows that 1% advantage in a given AI field is giving them advantages and returns manifold. So nobody will abstain from using this. Or developing these. Using these, we will see. In the Russian-Ukraine conflict, you see sporadic use of them right now, but I'm pretty sure that in other zones, when proxy war is a much easier possibility, they will be using it much longer. To your second question, well, it's hard to answer in a very short and concise way. What I truly believe in, and that's from my very heart, is that we need to get out of autopilot mode and we should set societal visions, because none of our current institutions are in a position to set a positive AI course for our civilization. We will be mired forever in military conflict, in exploitation, commercial or governmental, and so on and so forth. So the only way to change the equation is to come together in so-called bottom-up communities and start movements that are actually creating that good AI vision coupled with the technology, the AI technology developed that is fulfilling that vision. So in a many sense, we have to get back to the drawing board. And I love that and I fear that at the same time. But I think it's unavoidable to get out of this trajectory that we are in, because mostly I see it in a net negative format. So if we are talking about societal vision being, a utopian vision, a pseudo-utopian vision that is held by AI, we have to start many things anew.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that answer. And I think we have one more question from Esther, who is asking, at least 3 big AI players wants to win the battle in different formats. I'm afraid this type of competitive approach would not create a positive and sustainable environment to use AI for the well-being of our civilization. Is there a chance, and how, to move towards an augmented way, having a galvanizing message that could be attractive for all of them? How can we agree on a joint why and how?
Oh, these are 10 questions, Esther, I think, all together.
Yeah.
But I think that's very similar to what I've been saying. The unifying message should be that this is the age where we have to decide what vision, what purpose AI will serve. Nobody asked that question before. Even, what I mentioned under the Obama administration, it was only trying to find a few values that we have to observe. So instead of that mindset of avoiding pitfalls on a course that is generally not going in the right direction, we have to systematically attack everything that is wrong in the current model, either from an environmental sustainability perspective or societal impact perspective, and bring alternatives to life. I think that's the most important. If you want to get out of the, for example, advertising-based AI models right now, I'm not naming companies, what are your alternatives? You don't have any, right? Or you don't have any realistic alternatives in that regard. So that kind of technology serving civilizational purposes at the societal and at the individual level, maintaining that high ethical standards in developing new AI technology, this is how the work should start.
I see. Thank you very much for the answer, and thank you very much everyone for the questions. So I'm on one hand happy because you are also saying that there's a possible positive outcome. We have to create this outcome, and I think these conferences are especially made to this co-creation of these kind of ideals and goals for the AI. We have learned a lot of things today, actually. So there has been the synthesized data, as you mentioned, moving away from the gas-consuming cars, probably moving away to the synthesized data, to the data which is eliminating the biases, or to the data which is actually showing us a better mirror of ourselves so that we can improve ourselves as well, has been discussed in the first presentation, that AI and all the artificial intelligence algorithms that currently exist in social media are acting a kind of a mirror for ourselves. So I think there are things which are moving into the positive direction, and I think that is our responsibility to really form this and form a positive message together around this. Yeah.
Yes, if I may say one more thing, to do better AI, we have to be better people ourselves. That's my utter conviction.
Let this be the final words for this day of the conference today. Final and very good words. Thank you very much, George, for being here with us and for the discussion.